Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, it appears the head of the New York branch of the FBI has resigned. As I'll get to here in a moment, it appears this is at least abrupt. It's hard to say. You can't really say somebody resigned under duress in this context because, look, all of these folks that work in the American federal bureaucracy work at the ledger of the president. Now, there may be certain protocols associated with, disengagement of employment associated with like compensation and things that may need to occur. But at the end of the day, the president of the United States can effectively just fire, who as at his leisure can fire as needed. Again, depending on the nature of the job. There are certain jobs that are sort of legislatively created, and then there's certain oversight associated with that, or there may be checks and balances associated with, being able to dismiss that person. A perfect example of that would be the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell, who heads the Federal Reserve, it's a statutorily created entity. People can think what they will about it. You can probably guess my thoughts on the existence of the Fed. That being said, on a personal level, I think Jerome Powell has actually been one of the few people in the last roughly 5 years that I have seen trying to perform their function, while at the same time, I think he has actually acted at least to some degree toward the interests of the dollar itself. So putting Jerome Powell aside, I was simply trying to bring that up with regard to provide some analogy as to, there could be circumstances where perhaps somebody can't just be fired by the president. But with regard to the FBI, that's not really the case. Again, compensation issues regarding separation of employment and things, that's another matter, as I'm not even going to get into that really. But we've discussed in other videos here in Thailand, there's labor law here in Thailand, firing people, it's not just a, one-off, immediately done thing. There may be a process associated with it, as may be the case with regard to this New York City chief FBI officer. I don't know exactly what to call him, the FBI field office director, whatever, for New York City. That being said, I saw a comment on a prior video, which I actually responded to because it was somebody that was saying, I need to be wearing my MAGA hat and this isn't legal news. That was the one that really got me. It's like, how is the FBI not handing over work product to the Department of Justice? Not pretty much the most pressing legal news in an American legal context, at least at the federal level. I can understand at the state level over in America, there's all kinds of stuff going on, but at the federal level, the FBI refusing to hand over documentation to the Attorney General's office, that's a problem, and it's legal news by any metric. Now, there seems to be some, and this is purely speculative at this point, but there seems to be some speculation on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and I love the other one is people who say, oh, you're just listening to that, it's not real news. That was like years ago, people would tell me Zero Hedge wasn't real news when it was like, they're 3 days ahead of everybody else. I guess that's the hyper news or the proto news or something. It's in the autocatalytic sets of news where news is forming. Look, X is about as close, it's one of the great sources of news. I'll just put it that way. I think anybody could objectively state that. There's other news sources. We cite them on here all the time, as we'll get into here in a moment. But this whole notion that this is somehow not relevant legal news, that's just ridiculous to me. That said, I thought of making this video after a lot going on. I actually saw things on X. Again, Douglas McGregor has been the one that's been kind of my guide stone with regard to this, because I see him post in response or talking about some stuff, and then I'll go look into it and it looks odd. But I ended up digging down and I came to the New York Post, newyorkpost.com, or nypost.com, I should say. That's the letter N, the letter Y, post.com. Quoting directly, head of New York's FBI field office, James Dennehy, forced to resign in Trump admin shakeup. Quoting further, the top FBI agent in New York was ousted Monday, saying he wasn't given any explanation for the decision from Washington. Quote, late Friday, I was informed that I needed to put my retirement papers in today, which I just did. I was not given a reason for this decision, unquote. He wrote in the missive obtained by the Post. Dennehy apologized for the abruptness of his resignation in the letter, in which he called his colleagues, quote, an office of professionals who will always do the right thing for the right reasons, unquote. His departure marks the latest in a recent exodus from the Bureau under Trump's administration. Dennehy had a high-profile battle with acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove last month, or Bove, I don't know how to pronounce that, penning a defiant email to staffers urging them to quote-unquote dig in after officials tasked with investigating the January 6th riots at the U.S. Capitol were forced out of their roles. Quote, "Today we find ourselves in the middle of a battle of our own, as good people are being walked out of the FBI and others are being targeted because they did their jobs in accordance with the law and FBI policy," unquote, the email read in part. Yeah, the point I would try to make with this is, look, trying to nitpick around who individually is good, bad, or indifferent, it's not the purpose. Moreover, that's not really my concern. Like these little fiefdom turf wars amongst the bureaucrats, I could care less about. What really concerns me at a personal, visceral level, I would say, especially as it comes to the country of my birth and the foundational documents of the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and Bill of Rights that really are not only an anomaly in world history, but stand as a testament to true individual liberty and how you can create institutional frameworks to preserve and instill and maybe even fertilize further liberty, if you will. The point I would like to get back to, though, with respect to this, is at the end of the day, our legal system in the past 5 years roughly has become way overly politicized, and I would argue our political system in the U.S. has become way more corrupt for my taste than I would otherwise like it. Now, you know, funny, kind of jokey, old school Keystone Cops honest graph that used to, whatever, but where the FBI, which as we've discussed in other videos, was effectively created to act as the analog for private investigators from defense attorneys. That was what they were created for. And if you go back and look at their history, that's really what they were created for. They weren't supposed to carry guns. They weren't supposed to be the KGB. They were supposed to be the Federal Bureau of Investigation, not what they've sort of evolved into, but let's set that aside. The point I'm trying to get at, though, here is where the head of the FBI, or the FBI as this sort of nebulous, monolithic, bureaucratic leviathan, is refusing to cooperate with the Attorney General by handing over work product. That's a real problem. That means that effectively the bureaucracy of our justice system is broken. I mean, there's no other way to put that, I don't think. And to say that this is not news, I think is just so wildly inaccurate. And honestly, again, do I think there's going to be some huge upending here? No, but I think what you're seeing is people, we the people, if you will, and our representatives are pushing back against a lot of this and trying to scour off, like power wash, if you will, our institutions of some of this accreted, maybe not corruption per se, but paradigm of entitlement, a lot of fiefdom thinking inside the bureaucracy, which that stuff is not supposed to be there. You know, at the end of the day, these folks are supposed to operate at the leisure of whatever branch of government that created them at the pleasure of, and those folks are ultimately responsible to answer to we the people. I mean, that's what it comes down to, and I'm not trying to be overly naive or overly simplistic, but that is really the intended mechanism. That's how it's supposed to work. And again, I don't think I can restate enough how troubling it is that the FBI, whose sole function was to act as an investigative organ for the Department of Justice, is now refusing, apparently, to hand over investigative work product to the Department of Justice. You know, it seems to be operating it's either ossified or it is operating antithetically to its original remit. So again, the question has to be posed, what do we do about this? And I can't think of any more legal news more pressing than that, especially in an American jurisprudence context.